Right, let's bring in the Times assistant US editor, David Charter, who's reporting exclusively this afternoon that the US and Russia have discussed a West Bank-style occupation of Ukraine. David, welcome to the programme.
Thanks, Callum. Greetings from Washington, D.C.
Great to speak to you. Just bring us up to date then with what you have learned about the nature of these conversations and what is potentially on the table here.
Yeah, well, what I've been told is that this has been kicked around for some weeks now in very private discussions between Steve Witkoff, who's President Trump's peace envoy, and his Russian counterparts. And the basic thinking is that Russia is not going to withdraw from most, or maybe any, but certainly most of the territory that it's fought over in eastern Ukraine. And the top priority of the Americans has been to get the ceasefire to end the killing, as they say. And they, I'm told, see that the agree actually with the Russians that a solution that can end the killing, at least, is an occupation. The idea is that I think by likening it to the Israeli occupation of the West Bank is not to say that every aspect of that will be replicated, because it's, as you know, there are hugely controversial issues with the Israeli occupation of the West Bank. But I think they're pointing generally to the longevity of it.
Yeah. And
that
perhaps also the idea. Well, yeah, and I was going to say, just on that note, this idea that it would kind of sidestep almost the kind of legal or formal controversy that would come with any recognition of Russian territory that they have invaded and conquered being Russian. It kind of gets around some of the legalities of that.
It definitely does, because in order to abandon territory, to give it up to Russia, which is not obviously what Zelensky would do, the Ukrainians would have to have a referendum, which is practically impossible in the circumstances it finds itself in, because all of Ukraine would have to take part in it. So we're talking obviously Crimea, etc., where the Russians have occupied since 2014. So given the legal and practical extreme difficulties of resolving the conflict in that way, what seems to be a more realistic proposition has emerged, which is a more formalized occupation by Russia, and privately they're referring to it as like the Israeli occupation of the West Bank. Now, I don't know whether they would do this publicly. I have to say, this is from someone who knows what's going on in the room. But what it means is that Russia would maintain military control, it would get economic control of those areas, and it would bring in its own civilian governance of those areas.
Wow.
And this fits with the public statements that we've had from other leading people in the Trump administration, who have repeatedly said that they want to end the bloodshed, basically, and you've got to recognize the realities on the ground, because the only way you'll stop the war, and why would Russia stop its war that it's been carrying on for 3.5 years, unless it maintains a large degree of control over the territory that it has occupied.
Yeah.
And that's, from what I've been told, that reality has been accepted by the leading American negotiators.
Astonishing. David, it's excellent reporting. Thank you very much for bringing it to us this afternoon. We appreciate that. That is David Charter, who's the Times assistant US editor. To read his article, use your digital subscription and go to thetimes.com or refresh your app. Right, let's bring in Igor Novikov, former advisor to President Zelensky on US relations. Igor, good afternoon.
Good afternoon from Kiev. Hi.
It's very good to speak to you. So then, Prime Minister Starmer seems more sure, perhaps, that a ceasefire is possible. In his comments since these calls today, he says there is a viable chance of reaching a ceasefire that now exists. That feels like a change in tone. Do you think there is a viable chance of reaching a ceasefire?
I think there is, on one hand. On the other hand, we need to understand what that ceasefire looks like because Russia is definitely not interested in ending this war. Therefore, we just have to wait and see which cards Putin plays on Friday. And I fully agree with everyone who said that, like with President Trump, you're only going to know what happens on Friday on Friday.
How important was it that these calls have taken place today, involving President Zelensky and indeed getting him talking with President Trump alongside European allies?
Well, they are important in the sense that President Trump focuses on his kind of short-term expectations, and therefore the larger the frequency of conversations with him, the more there is a chance of actually influencing his decision. But on the other hand, I mean, I still think that we're going to have to wait until Friday, let Friday talks happen, and then react to them. Because with President Trump, and Putin in the same room, you can never predict.
Yeah, and that is the lesson from the Helsinki summit from 2018, isn't it? That actually that turned out to be less than predictable in terms of what the outcome of that actually was. I suppose then, Igor, the question now is, as we say, what happens on Friday and how this actually works. One idea that the Times is reporting has been discussed is this idea of a West Bank-style occupation of Ukraine by Russia. And our World Affairs editor was just explaining to us that this would be a kind of recognition of the status quo, but it would avoid any sort of legal formality of recognising this land as Russian. What do you make of that suggestion?
Well, I don't think it's the best suggestion, but I think the legal tools we use and the legal approaches we use to kind of formalize the status quo are less important than the actual status quo, because so far I haven't seen or heard anything from Russia to suggest that they're not insisting on Ukraine withdrawing from territories currently controlled by Ukraine. Something unacceptable not only to the Ukrainian president, but also to the Ukrainian people, and also illegal under Ukrainian constitution. You have to bear in mind that one of the goals that Putin has kind of outlined for himself in this war is to remove Ukraine's government. Therefore, he's going to try and use President Trump to push Zelensky beyond a certain point of legality in Ukraine, and thus getting rid of him later. Therefore, it's I don't think it's all about the legal tools that we use. I think we need to kind of formalize the outcome of this war first, and then think how we put it on paper.
Yeah, I guess the other question here then is how Zelensky approaches the aftermath of Friday, because there is one school of thought here, Igor, that if Zelensky rejects any deal, no matter how one-sided it may be, that in Trump's mind, Zelensky and Ukraine then become the primary obstacle to peace. Is that a real risk?
I think it's the biggest risk we're facing. I think that's one of the goals that Putin has actually set out for himself for Friday. He wants to get Trump's short-term expectations really high, and then basically give him an offer that Zelensky cannot kind of be a part of, and thus kind of redirecting Trump's anger towards Zelensky. Now, is that the end for Ukraine? I don't think so. I think there are too many cards to play here. I would even say even more here that this potential ceasefire is only a piece of the puzzle. You have to remember that we're too far away from post-Yalta, and the world is not going to be the same. We're not going to go back to the world we used to. We've been used to for like last 20 or 30 years. I think the new reality is being shaped right now. China hasn't said its word. India hasn't like properly reacted to the American tariffs. India hasn't kind of outlined its long-term strategy. Therefore, this is only one of the steps, and one of the important steps the world will have to take to approach that potential new stability.
Yeah. Igor, thank you very much. It's good to speak to you. Thanks for your time. Thanks. Now, that's Igor Novikov, former advisor to President Zelensky on US relations. So we await further updates, really, from President Trump at this point. He is who we need to hear from. And whether there will be any information in probably the next hour or so, of this meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, which is taking place right now as well.